As people may be aware, we brought Bevel on to coordinate our Caribbean activities, and he's here to give his update.
Thanks, John. Afternoon, everyone. This should be nice and quick. I want to give you a sense of what has been happening with ARIN in the Caribbean. And I want to start by just reminding us that even though the participation from the Caribbean region has been small, it actually covers a number of territories, and those territories we want to be able to service with even greater care going forward. So ARIN is in the Caribbean, and over the last period of time, the different territories in the region have understood that we exist, that we provide certain services, and that history has covered a number of strategic partnerships with organizations like the CTU. Many of you would have heard John, Nate, Susan, and others bring reports about the activities ARIN has been conducting in the region. But in spite of the long history and in spite of the understanding of some of the peculiarities of the Caribbean, there's a recognition that more has to be done. And even as the region evolves in terms of its use of networks and its understanding of the requirement to participate in the policymaking process, the outreach has to now become more deliberate. And that's what we've been discussing over the last period of time. How do we move into a greater degree of outreach and participation with our stakeholders in the Caribbean region? And so we have identified 3 areas, and I just want to share those with you in some detail. One, raising the profile of ARIN in the region. And this deals with the fundamental question that has been asked by several of the territories, and that's, who is ARIN? What do you do? How do we get involved? And so we want to make sure that over the next period of time, we'll be raising that understanding of ARIN across the Caribbean. Secondly, expanding the community. And you'd see it with the fellows who have been coming to ARIN meetings over the last period of time. We want to grow the participation of the Caribbean at ARIN policy development, not just in meetings, but on the mailing list and in the different fora. And that becomes our second priority. Thirdly, we want to strengthen and expand our partnerships with organizations like the CTU, like CaribNOG, and others that we've been working with. There's some institutions who represent an access or portal into the communities that we want to get deeper involvement with. So let's break those down and just see what specifically will be happening over the next period of time. One, increasing awareness of the mission, greater direct outreach and support to the technical community. ARIN intends to work more closely with CaribNOG to touch the technical community. As I indicated earlier, one of the things that is happening is that you have more networks being sprung up in the region. And traditionally, people have thought that the only way to get number of resources would have been through incumbent telecommunications operators. We had, Susan and I, a meeting in the BVI just before the storm, where at a breakfast discussion, we were talking about the ease with which people can approach ARIN directly. And there was genuine surprise that you can come straight to ARIN for number of resources and that you did not have to go to the telecom provider. And so we wanted to bring greater awareness of those kinds of opportunities for those who are building networks and those who are managing networks. Second is highlighting some of the issues, the policy issues and priorities that ARIN has to the Caribbean community, and encouraging greater participation in the meetings, and not just in person, but also using some of the remote tools and facilities. At the end of it, what we're hoping to have is greater contribution from the region. You would have heard several persons indicate that there is a unique perspective that is coming out of the region where you still have nascent networks, you still have some issues regarding understanding of possibilities and technical requirements. Bringing those people into the discussion process will involve outreach, will involve education, will also involve having them share their needs and their requirements to the wider ARIN community. Second issue of growing the support. One of the areas where the messaging is being developed is encouraging more persons, more organizations in the region to build out autonomous networks, to get their own resources and to understand how to manage and operate with less dependency on incumbent operators, for example. Of course, IPv6 deployment, IPv6 adoption, IPv6 utilization is another big priority in terms of engaging the Caribbean community, and we'll be facilitating workshops, training, and outreach in this area in the coming months, and extending ARIN on the road to new territories. You saw the list, you see the number of countries, many of whom have not participated in any way in the ARIN process. And we want to reach out to those territories and give them a sense of what services they can avail themselves of. As Susan said in her presentation, we're bringing the answers to the communities where they are. Encouraging sign-up and participation in the mailing list is another way that we hope to support the community in the region. And of course, getting more persons to sign up. I say here fellowship programs, but also nominate themselves for the advisory council and for the board as we go forward. And then how do we propose to strengthen the partnerships? Well, continuing to strengthen our interactions and relationships with the Caribbean community. And this is an interesting one because Caribbean itself is in a state of transition. The work with the CTU continues, and our work with other internet organizations in the region, including ARIN, including ISOC, ICANN, and the new National Internet Governance Forum is one way we see ourselves as being able to forge new partnerships in the Caribbean. And then we have some interesting discussions going on now with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, which is an intergovernmental organization representing 10 territories. They have their own regulatory structure, and they represent a way for us to now engage governments directly. And we believe that the governments actually represent a good platform for building out that message around network autonomy and participation in the ARIN policy process. So that's where the focus is going to be for the Caribbean in the coming months. I want to close by giving you a sense of some of the very immediate priorities. As many of you know, the region was given a double punch with 2 Category 5 hurricanes that in some cases literally took out entire countries, took them offline. Cell phones, power, landlines, all communication knocked out. We want to provide support for, and I have been actually working with some of the territories over the last few weeks with the support of the ARIN organization to provide that support for the disaster relief and recovery efforts. One of the things I want to note here is as tragic as the situation is, and many of the countries are still struggling to get back even basic amenities, as tragic as it is, it also represents an opportunity to reinforce this notion that the region has to take greater care and greater attention to how it builds out critical internet infrastructure and telecommunications infrastructure. We've been working and discussing both at ARIN, PCH, and others the possibility of establishing a commission that could look at the issue of network resiliency and have that as part of our contribution to the process moving forward. The expectation is hurricane seasons are annual. The expectation is that storms are expected to get stronger. If attention is not paid to this area, then we will be looking at these kinds of extreme weather events on an ongoing basis. So that's work that is happening now in collaboration with regional players, CTU, Caribbean, and others. We also, in the short term, making a real push to have more fellows join the ARIN fellowship process and participate in the meetings. The allocation is now 5 per meeting, and we're hoping that we can get good representation from across the region. Several territories have also indicated a desire to set up remote meeting points to join in the meetings and have groups gather for those who can't attend in person. Promoting IPv6 adoption, I indicated, was going to be a priority, and we're developing Caribbean-specific, Caribbean-tailored, I should say, material to help boost adoption and understanding of V6, and finally, contributing to the regional and national IGFs. 3 territories in the last 12 months have established national IGFs, and we have been working with them and their members to, in terms of providing speakers, providing resources, and helping support this very important development. So with this list, I think it's safe to say that the region will be feeling, sensing, and in a very real way, experiencing ARIN in an even greater way in the coming months. This is a good thing. The amount of territories represented in the Caribbean region alone ought to have a greater presence in these fora. And for that to happen, the outreach has to be greater and more relevant to the region. And that's what we intend to do. The message that we have and that we've been proclaiming is that ARIN is in the Caribbean. And for those of you who don't get it, keep staring at the image and you'll figure it out. But it's a serious message, and it has so far been accepted by the communities that we've brought this out to. The sense that we not just will be coming to conduct meetings, but that we'll actually be helping and supporting and encouraging the build-out of networks, infrastructure, and so on, in collaboration with those other organizations that have their own missions, is something that is resonating very well in the region, and we hope to emphasize this as we move forward. Thank you.
Out there, Bevel. Wait. Any questions for Bevel?
Any questions?
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Okay, we are still ahead of schedule, and we will. Oh, go ahead. You have a question? Yes, come on up. Bevel, come on up.
I want to thank you, Rudy Daniel, Caribbean. Just wanted to thank you for a great presentation. It was not really a question. I've listened to all of that, and I had something else in mind. I'm thinking like, ARIN is probably the only, or maybe one of the only RIRs that don't have LIRs. And I'm wondering if, how down the line, we have North America, we have, and then we have all these little islands. Now, when it comes to policy, it's like the bulk of the policy is going to be centered towards the large entity of the USA and Canada. The policy that really relates to and is very helpful towards the smaller islands, you know, the Caribbean, the North Atlantic. And I'm wondering if we could get to a point where we could have an LIR inside of ARIN, which will port a great deal of knowledge of policy development and the internet space to those small countries.
So there's nothing in particular that precludes the equivalent of an LIR from being formed. But there's also not a lot of benefit necessarily to be derived. And let me talk about this. Because if you think about how the LIR systems work, NIR systems work in some of the other regions, they operate within a framework of overall policy. And so there's not a lot of policy now as there was in the past. In fact, if anything, there's an aggressive move to simplify policies to make things simpler. So we're at an era here where, as someone got up earlier and said, for V4, we could put this all in one registry. There's no particular reason it has to be in 5, and at more than 5 if you count the NIRs. So it's not clear that there's any benefit or any policy need, because policy seems to be a decreasing element, not an increasing element. And so we've had policy discussions of needs for community networks. We had a Caribbean policy in the past. We've had policies for very particular cases. We've had a Canada resale,
Canada Cable.
wholesale cable
TPIA,
policy,
TPIA.
which are fairly specific policy. We're quite capable of handling those in the ARIN region. So if it turns out that there's a desire to have policy specific to the Caribbean, I believe ARIN's capable of handling it, and we have great attendance and participation, and we do a lot of engagement. So I'd recommend that first. If there's a region for an NIR structure, that comes with a lot of overhead, and it's actually not clear it has a lot of benefit. So I would advise looking at that very carefully to see the cost benefit.
John, I haven't really thought it out. It was a conceptual thought that I had on it. But there is a need in some of these states to inject knowledge and also knowledge of the multi-stakeholder bottom-up process, right? They're not as, perhaps I should say, as free to think as perhaps some of the larger countries. So there are elements there. But so I don't know how that balances out. But as I say, you know, it's something to think about. Yeah.
Add a bit to that.
Thank you.
Bill, any comments? Or?
Yeah, I do. Rudy, that's precisely why the priorities identified are as they are. We have to first get to the point where we engage a community with an understanding of what ARIN is, what the public policy process is like, and what their opportunities for engagement are. And that is going to take time before you get the kind of body of knowledge and awareness of what participation can actually mean. And it's not happening in a vacuum. As I said, the last 2 weeks with the storms actually creates an even different perspective on what ARIN means for the region in terms of building and supporting and strengthening network resiliency. And so for these things, for these messages to get out there, the community has to be engaged as a first step. And that's exactly what we intend to do.
That's great. I just want to say that I have a new network being rolled out in the next 6 months in the Caribbean. So
Right.
need your help.
Thank you, Bevel.
I think there's one over there.
Sorry,
Lee, go ahead.
Lee Howard, Batavia. This may be starting to get more into open mic time, which, as it happens, is next on the agenda, so I'm feeling okay with that.
Well, we actually have a presentation between.
Oh, I
but
missed
go
that.
ahead.
I'm sorry. But I wanted to respond to that point because my initial thought was, ooh, I actually don't like most of the NIRs, and then I thought about it a little bit more. As you were saying, it's not worth doing, and I went, yeah, okay, maybe you said it's maybe not worth doing. I think we maybe ought to explore that a little bit further. I think that's a conversation worth having. Arguing that, well, gee, we've never needed a separate structure because we haven't had any policy proposals here, is kind of arrogant of us to say because we're here. To say that we can handle, that we have mechanisms in it and plenty of participation in order to consider separate policy for the Caribbean, I think denies the population that's in the room. We don't have enough representation from the Caribbean. And having members in the Caribbean who can therefore discuss appropriate policies for them might actually bring better policies to them. Just because we're running out of policy ideas doesn't mean that there aren't new ones required there. I'm not yet advocating for it, but I think there are arguments that we ought to listen and think about it a little bit further.
I want to be clear. I wasn't advocating against it.
It sounded
what
like
I was saying was there are cost trade-off analysis, and people need to show up and describe what it is that needs to be solved in order to understand that. Because we do a lot of outreach in the Caribbean, and we do end up engaged heavily with, for example, the CTU and their activities and the ICT outreach, we actually have a lot of contact, and we have not heard the voice saying there's a need for an NIR system down there. And so it's not that there's necessarily no reason to do it or that it's not a good idea. It's that it's an idea, but like most ideas, you start with a problem statement and then you come up with a solution. I don't know the problem statement yet. And so people should get together and talk about that and talk to others. And if there's a problem to be solved, and that's a solution for it, that's great. There may be other solutions.
And that's what I want to encourage is further discussion, especially among people who aren't in the room.
Yeah.
Oh, right, very much so.
Good.
Yes, Kevin?
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, and I believe that's why Bevel is in the room
Right.
today as an employee of ARIN, going down and being a part of the Caribbean region as a dedicated resource. Be careful what you wish for. John, you were really, I think, tempered in what you said. Be careful what you wish for with NIRs. You are going to add a level of complexity in policy that may not be good for actually improving things. It may make things worse. So, yes, by all means. I think what I heard, though, was two different issues. The primary function of an NIR is related to policy. What I heard being discussed was not the policy side of the NIR, but the outreach and education and community portion of the NIR. That doesn't need to be formalized. That has nothing to do with anything. But from a policy perspective, the NIR in this region, I don't think would be a good idea. Thank you.
Understood. Any other questions for Bevel? Okay, thank you, Bevel.